journalist and political commentator, and to my far left, Owen Thompson, SNP MP for Midlothian. The number to call if you'd like to ask the panel a question, as always, is 0345 6060 973. You can text your question to 84850 or say, Alexa, send a comment to LBC. And of course, you can watch us on Global Player.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
Let's go to our first caller. It's Jonn in Guildford. Hello, Jonn.
Oh, hello, Iain. Thanks for taking my call, and hello, panel. Just the question is, and I wonder if the panel would agree, I'm a pensioner, basically on state pension. I believe that I should inherit my late mum and dad's pension, add to go towards my pension, and then I forward my pension to my son or daughter. I think this would help me financially, and it's my mum and dad's money. They paid in for it. I'm paid in for it. So what's the panel's thoughts?
Well, that's an interesting suggestion. I wonder whether Jeremy Hunt will rise to the challenge in the budget tomorrow. Theresa, how do you react to that? Because I imagine you've got a lot of constituents who will be cheering Jonn on with that.
We absolutely have to make sure that we look after our older citizens. It's obviously quite a technical question. I think to some degree it depends what the terms are of your pension. I think it may be possible to set up these kind of arrangements already. But certainly I'm sure the Chancellor will be looking at various pension-related matters in the budget tomorrow, and hopefully he's going to have some good news for people who save for a pension. But whether it covers this point, of course, I don't know.
I suspect not. But what he is expected to say is that people can save up to 1.8 million over a lifetime, up from 1.1 million currently, without being penalised. And I think that is largely to address the point that so many doctors are retiring early because they aren't allowed to sort of bump up their pension pots.
I've been banging on about this for years.
Bang on a bit now, then. Just tell our listeners exactly what lies behind this, because it seems a bit of an odd thing to have done in the first place, to reduce it.
Yeah, well, it means that essentially GPs and senior hospital doctors are tending to retire earlier and earlier because they get to a point where their pension has built up, and they incur some very hefty tax penalties. So it's hardly worthwhile they're continuing to work at all. And I'm convinced that that's contributing to the shortage of capacity, particularly in GP practices. That's why I've spoken to successive chancellors about getting this fixed. And it looks as if maybe that will happen in the budget.
But of course, on the converse, people will say, oh, well, that's okay. You're helping people on £100,000 a year. What about us?
I hope there will be help for various different groups, but I think we do need to recognise that if you massively tax people's pensions, and this particularly covers the public sector where the pension system is somewhat more generous, but it does have impact on public services. We do need to find a way to keep our doctors if we're going to clear those NHS backlogs and if people are going to get to see their GP when they want them.
Owen Thompson, is this a big issue in Scotland as well, presumably?
It certainly is, and I mean, I think while the Chancellor taking some steps to address some of the issues around perhaps retention and doctors, that's an encouraging step, but it doesn't actually deal anything in the fact of there's so much pensioner poverty, and the Chancellor needs to go so much further. I think John's question is an interesting one, and I would have some questions about legacy pensions, because I think the drain on the overall pension pot, if you were able to simply continue to pass a pension down to the family, I think there could be challenges with that over the certain medium time, not even the longer term. But if the Chancellor was tomorrow to stand up and take the chance to actually do more for the lower paid pensioners, by all means, look out.
Like what? What would you like to see him do?
It needs to be increasing the pension amount. I mean, the pension that we've currently got, the state pension in the UK, is one of the lowest in Europe. I mean, there's very simple things you could do simply by increasing the basic amount will help pensioners who are struggling with their energy bills, are struggling with the food costs, are struggling with so many of the issues that have arisen off the back of Brexit. And now the Chancellor could stand up tomorrow and he could actually take steps to address some of that, which I would be first one to cheer him and welcome him for doing so. I just don't think he's going to do that.
But you could argue, and before I have pensioners on my back here, I'm saying you could argue, I'm not necessarily arguing this, that pensioners as a group are among the richest groups in society. So again, it's a similar point that I made to Theresa. Well, surely if you have money to support a group in society, should pensioners be the top of that list?
I didn't necessarily say they should be top of the list, but just because they're a very wealthy group in general terms doesn't take away from the fact that there are so many pensioners who just can't afford to heat their homes. So that much more needs to be done, and the pension would be a great way for the Chancellor to start to make moves towards that. But they could do much, much more in terms of how we can better support everyone in their energy costs.
Nimco.
I think it's really interesting what he said, that he was on a state pension. So I think this idea of the fact that because we pay taxes that we're entitled to a state pension is kind of a fallacy. And I say that as a millennial who probably won't get access to a state pension because the way that things are going. I think what we do is the fact that I was freely educated. There's the NHS, there's all these things. So the taxation we pay as adults in our working time is not necessarily for our pensions, but it's to pay forward for the people who actually paid for us to be educated and to live in a society where there's social benefits. So I think that conversation around trying to pass down your pension to your parents and to your children doesn't really work from a state kind of level, but ultimately it does work in a private. I think there are private sectors that do that, but ultimately I think the best way to be able to increase taxation, money within the tax pot, is to be able to support more and more women and young people get back into work. Those that are from my generation, again, those that are out of work because of childcare issues. So the whole point is, if we want our pensioners to be able to have more money, then we need more money to be taxed, and that money needs to be taxed, so people need to be working, and the best people to be working are out of the market at the moment are young mothers and families.
Jonathan.
I support a lot of what Nimco just said. Look, obviously, pensioners are quite a well-treated cohort of society, as you were just alluding to, Iain. Also, you have the triple lock. A lot of them, I think a majority of them own their own homes. They profited from successive booms in the economy, and crucially, they vote more than any other cohort of society. So there's a strong incentive for governments to treat them well. Now, I don't have a problem with pensioners being treated well. I think that everyone should be treated well in this country. And so, in terms of John's question, I think that sounds like a reasonable suggestion, provided that it's subject to inheritance tax in the usual way. So I don't mind that pensioners are sort of being given sort of handouts or help. But the problem is, as Nimco is just alluding to, that help does not seem to be uniformly balanced across the economy. And so if you're going to have pensioners sort of getting more tax breaks, if you like, having much more tax-free allowance than they do at the moment, then where is the help for people at the other end of the spectrum? Where is the help for younger people? Where is the help for the lowest paid taxpayers? In the 1970s, you had a rule that as inflation rose, the threshold for tax had to rise in proportion. That has been forgotten over recent years, and so we have more and more people being taken into tax that wouldn't have been paying tax earlier. And I don't see.
Well, you do for the 40p tax. I mean, actually, a lot of people have been taken out of tax because the threshold has risen to £12,500 from £6,000 in 2010.
Right, so that was a long time ago.
Well, of course, yes, you're absolutely right. It was, but it's the people in the so-called squeezed middle that have been really affected by this. I suspect a lot of your constituents will have been affected by that.
Yes, but it is important to note that the threshold has pretty much doubled. So that's taken hundreds of thousands, millions of people out of income tax altogether. So
going back to the pensions point, the other thing, one of our listeners suggested, I think, was it last night or certainly fairly recently, why is it that pensioners don't pay national insurance? Now, you can argue, well, they've paid into it all their lives, so they're getting the pension and all the rest of it. But there are so many more pensioners now working beyond a pensionable age. And you think, well, actually, that is a pretty substantial tax cut for people. And if you wanted to reinvest the money maybe into childcare or sort of youth services, that would be one way of doing it. But you can't imagine certainly a Conservative government doing that, can you?
No, look, the Conservatives, pensioners are not only the people who vote the most, but they vote Conservative the most. So I don't suppose that pensioners are going to sort of be suffering particularly under the Conservatives. Look, as I say, I think everyone should be being treated more fairly and sort of, getting as much help as they can in these troubled times. I just think it's a problem when the people who are most likely to vote for a government are given the most help.
Well, let's take a follow-up question. John, thank you for that. It's a text question from Jenny in Haddam. Does the panel agree agree that expensive childcare in the UK needs a total overhaul. The suggestions of new help being given for the care of 1 and 2 year olds misses out those who need to go back to work from maternity leave long before their child is a year old. What would the panel propose to help that group? Nimco.
I think childcare should be looked as infrastructure. The whole point is that this is the next generation of employees, of taxpayers that we're helping to raise. I think this idea, the fact that we just assume women specifically just to be able to miraculously understand how to look after their children until they're 3, then 20 hours or so of free time kind of comes in is quite problematic. I do actually think, so when the last government had taxation and said that they were going to increase tax but pay for social care rather than paying for childcare, I think that was a problem. I ultimately think that a lot of people, including myself, who don't have children, would actually be fine with an increase in tax in order to pay for childcare, because that's an investment in our future GDP.
Theresa?
We actually had a debate about this in Parliament only a few days ago, and there was sort of cross-party agreement that it is absolutely worthwhile to invest in childcare and early years education. Now, the Chancellor's going to have limited room for manoeuvre because of the 2 massive shocks from the global economy, the COVID outbreak and the spike in oil prices caused by the Ukraine war. But I'm encouraged by what I'm hearing, that there might be something on childcare. We do need to address this problem that childcare in this country is so much more expensive than it is in many places. And if we're going to support women in the workplace, and if we're going to support them to work full-time rather than part-time, one of the ways in which we do it is by providing help with childcare, and I do hope there may be something in the budget on that.
But isn't the way it's done at the moment effectively leading to childcare inflation, where the government says, yes, we're going to provide much more money for this group of children and that group of children, and the nursery providers or the childcare providers are almost encouraged, therefore, to then increase their prices accordingly. And if that happens, that's not providing more places. It's not actually helping people with their childcare bills, is it?
Well, another problem is there's a patchwork of different entitlements, and there's a lack of understanding, particularly tax-free childcare. It's a good scheme, but lots of people don't take it up because they don't know about it. They don't understand it. So I think we do need to look at the way these childcare support payments are allocated, and I'm certainly pleased that it looks like the childcare component of universal credit is going to become more accessible and be paid up front. I think that will make a big difference.
I think we have to make it easier in order for people to understand what childcare is available out there. And it's not necessarily just about the expenditure of child support, but actually what we're losing within our kind of society. I think the whole point is that there is massive investment. So childcare, or children being able to socialise at a very young age, and their parents being able to work, especially within my generation, is something that is good for their mental health. And ultimately we are investing in the future. So I think the government needs to see what the expenditure that they have now is going to actually give them for the future, and it's going to give them a more rounded society. So I think we need to start looking at childcare, like I said, as real infrastructure. So the way that we look at the NHS, we look at policing and other things, I think childcare has to be part of those conversations.
Well, The Guardian is reporting this evening that the Chancellor will invest £30 billion. Is that really 30 billion, not 3 billion? That seems an awful lot. Into childcare, providing an extra 30 hours a week to parents of 1 and 2 year olds and increase free childcare for 3 year olds. I mean, 30 billion, I don't think
that can be right. I mean, if that turns out to be right and affordable, then
that would be. Oh no, it's 4 billion apparently. So Nimco is getting very excited.
I was actually saying that there might be a very Labour-like budget coming through from Jeremy Hunt, and I thought 30 billion is very Labour-like. So, yeah.
The important point here, I mean, I think the Scottish Government recognised the importance of giving support to families with young children. That's why there's the 1,140 hours of funded childcare for all children in Scotland, and that's being looked at to be extended downwards to the 2 year olds as well. So the Scottish Government have already taken that decision, and I would love it if the rest of these islands could benefit from decisions like that if they've had a bit more of a progressive government in place. But until they do, such things are put in place. Certainly my constituents are very fortunate that the Scottish Government did take that decision, because we are seeing significant benefits from it, and the ability particularly of mums to be able to go back to work.
Jonathan, Nimco thinks it should be treated as sort of akin to national infrastructure. There will be a lot of people listening who think, well, this is all balderdash. If you have children, it's your responsibility to provide for them, to look after them. Why should it be the state that does that?
I think that's just such a myopic view. I mean, every society needs children for, by every single metric. You need children who become adults, who then sort of work the economy, who then look after the elderly, who then actually become productive members of society. I mean, unless you're saying that no one should have children, we should become just a rapidly aging society and then become extinct, which is the alternative to having children. So I think this is a national scandal about how childcare is treated in this country, which is almost like a nice to have, an optional extra, which condemns mostly women to years outside the workforce and contributes to the gender pay gap as well, because women have to take enforced career breaks in order to look after children. And let's face it, it's mostly women who do that work in this society that we have. And so when the government keeps on talking about being world leading in all kinds of areas, why can't we ever hear them being world-beating on childcare? Because look at just a few countries that are absolutely comparable to us in terms of their economy, in terms of their sort of liberal democracy. You have Finland, which has universal childcare from the ages of 8 months to 7 years. You have Sweden, where you can use a monthly allowance to pay only £15 a month for daycare. You have Norway, which is, I think, maximum of £200 a month. That is compared to, I think, an average of £1,150 a month in the UK, where parents of 2 young children are spending on average 30% of their income. So there are so many women who aren't able to go back to work because they can't afford to.
But Nimco, you might be able to answer this. Why aren't there more people rushing to set up childcare facilities, nurseries? Because if it's so lucrative, you would have thought.
But it's not about lucrative. So that's the whole thing. I think that's where Liz Truss was wrong in terms of looking at the numbers and making childcare cheaper. We don't need to make childcare cheaper. We need to be able to allow people to access quality childcare, because the whole point is if you're going to set up a shed in your back garden and try to say, okay, well, I can look after your kids for £10 a day. Of course, people that are desperate are going to take that, but as a society, those are things that are not allowed. So they're rightly so. Childcare is regulated in order to make sure that children.
But if it can be provided in other countries cheaper than it can be here, there's something wrong in the way that it's working.
Yeah, what's wrong is the fact that the government or successive governments haven't taken it seriously. And I know that Jonathan has named some European countries, but Canada's done it recently. So nobody pays more than $10 a day for childcare. And I think we can actually do that. And it is going to cost money, and it is going to be a hard thing to sell at the beginning, because everybody thinks that these are your children, so this is your business. But I don't have any children, but I will be happy to pay more tax in order to ensure there was quality childcare out there for those that need it.
I mean, free universal education might have been subject to similar sort of concerns and about payment and cost at some point, but that is seen as completely normal. So why can't we just extend that from the age of, from toddlers onwards rather than from 6?
Okay. Right, we'll move on in just a few moments' time with Jonathan, with Nimco, Theresa and Owen. It's 19 minutes past 8.
This is LBC.
This is why we should keep the microphones on during breaks. We've just been having a very animated discussion about women's breasts and men's pecs, haven't we?
Yeah, they're the same thing.
But we better move on, hadn't we? Because we have with us Theresa Villiers, Conservative MP for Chipping Barnet and former Cabinet Minister, Nimco Ali, social activist, Chief Executive of the anti-female genital mutilation charity, the Five Foundation, Owen Thompson, SNP MP for Midlothian, and Jonathan List, journalist and political commentator. And our next question comes from Ben in Clacton. Hello, Ben.
Hello, Ian. Good evening, panel. The question is, does a refugee from the war in Yemen deserve the same compassion as people from Hong Kong, Afghanistan and Ukraine?
And you mentioned those three countries because they have specific schemes, yeah?
Yes, and a refugee from a war that we're second-hand involved in by supplying arms to Saudi Arabia. That's why I chose Yemen, because it's a war, a forgotten war, where people are dying just as much as in other wars, and famine and disease.
And I've been listening to a few programmes on LBC recently where I've heard families who've been hosting Ukrainian refugees for a year say that they want what they call refugee favouritism to come to an end. Jonathan List.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more with what Ben has just said. And I'd extend it. You know, there are wars raging in other parts of the world as well. You know, there are lots of refugees from places like Eritrea, South Sudan, Central African Republic. You know, there are a lot of trouble spots in the world that are producing refugees. You know, Libya, which, let's not forget our role in Libya, 12 years ago, which displaced a number of people. So the fundamental point is this, which Ben just alluded to. Unless you are from Hong Kong, Ukraine or Afghanistan, and you're able to benefit from very specific and limited schemes, which don't even apply to, the whole of Afghanistan, for example, there is no legal or safe way for you to reach the United Kingdom in order to claim asylum. The government has effectively wound up every scheme, even very limited schemes like the Dubs Amendment to bring children, to reunite children, unaccompanied children with their families in this country. And that is why, one of the many reasons why I find this new proposed law so disgraceful, so reprehensible, because it's based on a fundamental lie that's basically saying that ordering people to stop coming here on the boats on fear of criminalisation and sort of permanent exclusion for the United Kingdom, but not offering them any other way to claim asylum in this country, no matter what their circumstances from their country of origin, no matter what their situation in the UK with regards to family and sort of, kinship and sort of historic ties at all. So when the government
says... But they're
says,
already in a safe country. In France,
that doesn't matter. It doesn't, because it's not. That's not what the 1951 Refugee Convention says. For a start, it doesn't. The Refugee Convention doesn't say that you have to go stop in the first safe country that you arrive in. And people have been going through safe countries on the way to other countries in times of war and crisis, famine, since time immemorial. My family, was in Eastern Europe 100 years ago. A Jewish family, they would have gone through safe countries on their way to Britain, where they finally made a home. That was never considered an issue before. Because if you just say that you have to stop in the first safe country, then what's to stop every country effectively pulling up the drawbridge and deferring or outsourcing the problem to the country to their right, or the country that's nearer the crisis problem? Because then what you have effectively is an entire breakdown of the global asylum regime, which is a global problem where every country, particularly every developed country, needs to do its bit. Britain can't simply put its hands up and say, we're an island, we kind of, absolve ourselves of responsibility for dealing with this crisis. We no longer take part in any kind of global solidarity for this crisis. So if the government really wants to stop the boats, they can do it tomorrow. They can set up processing centres in UK embassies abroad. They can grant refugee visas for people to come here through sort of irregular means so they can claim asylum here, which is their human right. They can even horror, set up processing centres in France for people in France who want to be allowed the chance to come to Britain. And let's always remember that we take far fewer refugees than most other countries, most comparable countries, let alone countries, in the thick of it, near crisis points. And the other point is that the vast majority of asylum seekers who do come here are declared by the hostile government's own metric to be legitimate asylum seekers, not horror upon horror economic migrants.
Theresa.
We have offered around 500,000 people refuge since 2015 through the schemes such as the Ukrainian, the Syrian, the Afghanistan ones, and it is important that we maintain these safe and legal routes. But I think we do have to be realistic that we need to have some limits on the numbers, and also it is vital to ensure that we get a grip on this problem of illegal small boat crossings.
But what about Ben's point, though, that why should a refugee from Yemen not receive the same treatment as someone from Ukraine, Afghanistan or Hong Kong?
Well, under the process of safe and legal routes, I can't see why it wouldn't be possible to have a Yemen scheme, but you do need to make sure that you keep some reasonable cap on numbers. I mean, the UN itself has said that there are 100 million people displaced. With the best will in the world, it's not feasible to offer sanctuary.
But do you not think it was disgraceful for the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, to make out in her speech in the House of Commons last week that they were all coming here?
I don't know what she said exactly, but I can't believe she would have implied
she
that
absolutely
100 million
did.
people
She
were going
absolutely
to come here.
did. I think her exact words were, and they're all looking to come here.
Yeah.
All I would say on that is that this is a matter of important public interest and public concern. There is a recognition that we're a generous country in terms of offering people asylum, as illustrated by the response to Ukraine war and the fact that we have offered sanctuary to 500,000 people over recent years. But people do want some overall limits on numbers, and they don't want the illegal crossings to continue because
well, I think that's true.
So many of those crossings are as a result
when you
of
look at some of the language that's been used, not just by the Home Secretary, you had the Prime Minister, who I would have expected better of at the PMQs last week, saying that Keir Starmer was on the side of people traffickers. Now, when you use language like that, that has consequences, and we now see that the boats issue is number 2 in the league table of public concerns. I don't think it would have been there had this language not been used. Isn't it totally irresponsible?
There's an obligation on all of us in public office to use temperate language, but this is an issue which worries a lot of people. I don't think there's any getting away from that. And
I agree with that.
It has sharply divided opinion, and we've got to stop the boats.
You wouldn't use that kind of language, would you? I know that you wouldn't. And does it not make you feel uncomfortable that some of your colleagues are?
I think the important thing is we need to get a grip on this. We need to stop the boats. We need to break the model of the people smugglers.
Okay. Owen.
I'm despairing at what we've seen this week from the government. And sadly, I mean, Labour, I have to say, when you look at the detail of what they're proposing, isn't actually that much better in terms of their actual proposals, albeit their language is slightly better. I mean, we don't do nearly enough. I mean, if it weren't for a sort of an accident or fortune of birth, it could be any one of us facing that sort of situation. And I certainly would hope that if I ever had to be in a place where you need sanctuary because you're fleeing from some sort of atrocity that people who are trying to come here are doing, that neighbouring countries would look to help and support us, as many of them do. As Jonathan says, we don't take nearly the same numbers of refugees or asylum seekers as equivalent nations near us. And there's absolutely no reason that people who are absolutely fleeing for their lives are trying to do by coming here. So I think so much more needs to be and should be done. I mean, simply to have tripping this down to a sort of 3-word stop the boat slogan is just absolute nonsense. And all it's doing, it's allowing those who do want to turn this argument into something more on the far right, it's allowing them to tag on to the comments made in Parliament and use that as a rallying call to bring more to their cause. And I think it's irresponsible, and that government should be leading from the front and actually saying, dispelling a lot of the myths around this, because it's not the invasion that they've suggested it is, and we just need to be doing so much more, because these are people that really need help, and what they're doing is they're facing this country saying, no, you can't come in, where they've shut down every legal possible route that they could try.
Nimco, I'm going to come to you after the news because I want to give you a bit of a go on this, because I'm interested to hear what you want to say rather than restrict you to sort of a short time, because we do have to get to the news headlines. It's 8:32. Charlotte Morgan is here with the news headlines.
America says one of its unmanned drones has been forced to fall into the Black Sea after colliding with Russian fighters. US officials say 2 jets clipped one of its propellers, while Moscow says it crashed because of sharp manoeuvring. The Shadow Chancellor has told LBC Labour would back an announcement on childcare in the budget tomorrow if it's a serious package of support. Rachel Reeves said she'd welcome measures to help working parents. And some cough, cold and flu medicines are being removed from sale in pharmacies as a precaution. They all contain Volcadine, and there are concerns over rare cases of a reaction when they're combined with general anaesthetics. LBC weather, rain continuing in some central and eastern areas tonight. Wintry showers in the far north with a low of -7.
This is LBC.
Yeah. 8:36 on LBC. Tomorrow's cross question panel is Dame Andrea Leadsom from the Conservatives, Richard Bergen from Labour, Juliet Samuel, the columnist who I'm told is about to move from the Telegraph to the Times. I wonder if there's a transfer fee involved in that. And Stephen Bush from the Financial Times. So they'll be joining us this time tomorrow. Our panel tonight consists of Theresa Villiers, Nimco Ali, Owen Thompson and Jonathan Liss. Right, Nimco, you were all collectively answering a question from Ben in Clacton, which was basically, should a refugee from Yemen receive the same compassion as asylum seekers from Ukraine, Afghanistan and Hong Kong? What's your answer?
Yes, and it's actually quite sad. I think it was a few weeks ago that I was on this same panel talking about the fact that the Home Secretary should consider her language, but she's kind of really doubled down on the narratives of the way that she's speaking about people like me, like I said to her. And one of the things is it's not 100 million refugees, it's 100 million people that are displaced. And the reality is most of those people are staying local to the communities and the countries where they're displaced from. So Somaliland, where I'm from, which is an unrecognised country, is dealing with the refugees from Ethiopia at the moment, where there's a war that we're not talking about. There's a refugee camp in Kenya called Dadaab, which is over 30 years old, because people want to be able to stay close to their countries and their communities because they have a hope for peace. So ultimately, the way that we can really be dealing with this, it was quite ironic that on International Women's Day, that our Foreign Secretary and the Foreign Office put out a policy that was really going to put women and girls at the heart of our foreign policy, which is meant to be a reflection of what global Britain is about. But then our Prime Minister, was tweeting this idea of bogus claims for for women that are trafficked under human rights protection. I think we need to get a grip of the way that we're looking at this. I know there's local elections. I know the Conservative Party is concerned about losing these local councils in places where the small boats are coming into. But I do think that that my family was given asylum under a Conservative government. Many of my friends are from Bosnia or Rwanda were given asylum under a Conservative government, and I think that this government and this Prime Minister is definitely better than this. I won't necessarily say that about the Home Secretary.
Okay. Strong words there. Let's go to our next question. Ben, thank you for that. It's an Alexa question from Nicholas in Workington. Does all the public rowing between the SNP leadership contenders mean it's all over for Scottish independence? I think I'll come to you first, Owen.
Not at all. I think there's clearly a robust exchange of ideas, and I mean we've not in the SNP had a leadership contest since the early 2000s, and we've had a very sort of stable process since that of a sort of easy transition between leaders when they have changed. So it's a relatively new experience for a lot of the membership of the party, and the three candidates each have their platform to set out.
To knock 10 bells out of each other.
And are robustly putting forward their stall on it.
You should be a diplomat, not a politician.
But I mean, what I would say from it is that each of them, despite their differences of opinion, each of them are demonstrating the different ways in which Scotland needs to be independent, because we're consistently held back by the UK government. We have decisions taken that nobody in Scotland has voted for in elections. We've not elected a Conservative government in Scotland, or a majority of Conservatives in Scotland since the 1950s. Yet,
nor has Liverpool, but Liverpool's not looking to leave the...
Well, maybe they should. No, I mean, Liverpool's not a nation, and Scotland is a historic nation, and I don't think it's too much to ask that the basic principles of democracy should be applied, that where the people of Scotland as a nation in a recognised election vote for something, that is what they get. I mean...
But what you've got at the moment is the latest polls show that only 39% of people support independence, and that it was, I think, up to 56% at one point. And the period since Nicola Sturgeon resigned has not been a happy one, all three candidates, as I say, knocking 10 bells out of each other, learning nothing from the Rishi Sunak-Liz Truss contest, it seems. Aren't you worried about where the cause of independence is heading?
Well, I think there's been multiple polls over recent weeks. Some of them have us slightly behind, some of us has independance slightly ahead. So I think...
I haven't seen a single poll that shows independence over 50%.
2 days ago, I think it was 52%. So, they are, and the polls have fluctuated. Now, we've got a lot more to do, clearly, to take it from the just over 50% to clearly over 50%, and there's more people to be convinced. I don't think anyone of the candidates would deny that, and they're all setting out their stall to do it. And like I say, I mean, I think it's encouraging that we've got talented candidates willing to put themselves forward to take on the role as leader of the party, and probably most likely next First Minister, because unlike the UK Parliament, the First Minister in Scotland's elected by the Scottish Parliament. All members in the Scottish Parliament get a vote on who the First Minister is, so the leader will be the preference or the favourite for that, if you like. But no, I think that absolutely. I mean, we are going to go from strength to strength off the back of this. And the SNP is like a big family, and families argue at times, and they have disagreements, and sometimes very strong disagreements, but they will always come back together, and the SNP will do the same.
Stephen Flynn, the Westminster leader of the SNP, your boss, I guess, was on Andrew Marr's programme earlier, and he said that he hoped that Scotland would be a republic within 5 years of independence. I think Humza Yousaf, who you're supporting, has said something similar. Do you think that's going to go down well with the Scottish electorate?
I have to say, I think it probably will. These are matters. I mean, to me, independence is about Scotland having the options to make decisions for ourselves as a nation. And I mean, that's the sort of thing that if Scotland was going to do that, it would be for the people of Scotland to decide that. And whether it was party standing in an election with a manifesto promise to establish a republic, to cease from the monarchy, then that's a position that's absolutely legitimate.
Shouldn't
for
that be a
any
referendum
nation.
on its own?
But it could well be. I mean, that's entirely possible. But this is something that would be within the gift of an independent nation to actually ask its people, and then for that wish to be enacted.
Theresa?
I am a very strong believer in keeping the United Kingdom together, because I think, you know, the unity and friendship between the different nations of the UK is a tremendous force for good. It really is. And, you know, separation would also see, you know, Scotland not only losing out on that, but losing out on the security provided by a larger economy, you know, the huge 400 billion COVID support scheme, the energy price schemes. All of these are much easier to deliver as part of a United Kingdom, and standing together to support Ukraine as well. Our armed services would be fractured by Scotland's separation. So I think there's a really positive case for the United Kingdom staying together.
But all of the
Small
arguments
nations are able to respond much quicker to some of these global situations that arise. Small nations are actually much more fleet of foot and much better.
So why would you not? Why would you want Scotland to join the EU? And the arguments that you just put forward, Theresa, were kind of the Remain arguments.
It's very funny when Brexit is
It's a completely different situation, because we've been together for hundreds of years. You know, we've got.
And nobody's saying that the other countries in Europe aren't independent nations. I mean, I think the whole argument of Europe controlling us when we were a part of the European Union is just nonsense. It came from the Brexit camp, and unfortunately it was the successful one in that referendum. But
I mean, you're joining. President Macron on Friday said that he couldn't make any decision about returning refugees to France, because of course it was a matter for the European Union to decide. So up to a point.
As an independent nation, though, you would have that say at the table within Europe, as opposed to simply being an extra part of the UK as it was, as we are just now.
Okay, Jonathan.
You can get repeatedly outvoted, so that means that you're subject to laws that your elected representatives...
Them's the breaks.
Well, that's what happens to Scotland right now, Theresa.
We don't get a say.
Look, I don't express a view on Scottish independence, and I never have, but I think it's...
Why on earth not? You're on a panel where you're expected to...
No, I'm not. No, I'm
views.
going to answer the question which was asked, which is it all over for Scottish independence? That question I can answer, which is it looks very bleak for the cause. And I think it's incredibly unfair what has happened to the Scottish government, if you like, because the SNP has stood on a platform of holding a new independence referendum in the last 4 national elections in Scotland, and it's won every single one of them. And that view, that manifesto commitment, has been overturned by one person in Downing Street. Yeah. So either Scotland has self-determination or it doesn't. And if it doesn't, I think that Scottish people are entitled to ask why they don't have self-determination. So Nicola Sturgeon has done everything, or did everything that she possibly could have done to sort of, implement the manifesto commitment on which she was elected. But ultimately, if the Westminster government is not prepared to play ball, there's very little that she can do. So, she can't force, no matter a woman of her extreme talent and charisma cannot overturn a decision of the Supreme Court, for example. And so I feel for her, because...
You could argue that she shouldn't have ever taken it to the Supreme Court.
Well, because, no, the point is that how are the Scottish people supposed to ask for a referendum if not at the ballot box in a Scottish election? And they have done that 4 times. Now, you can argue about whether that's what they wanted. The point is they elected a government that wanted that. And so now I just think it's very, very difficult to see where any leader of the SNP goes from here, because the options have been exhausted while the Westminster government is putting its foot down. And that is a very, very dangerous position, I think, for UK democracy, where a Scottish government clearly wants something, the Scottish electorate have endorsed it, and one person in Downing Street is saying no to, indefinitely.
And he has the constitutional power to say no,
But it
because
doesn't make
under
it-
the
doesn't make it
legislation,
fair or right.
it is down to the Westminster government as to whether a referendum should take place. But actually, I agree with every single word you said there. Nimco.
I think everything's been said in the sense that I was happy that Scotland got its moment to have a referendum before, and I was happy with the fact that they stayed. But I think ultimately I can understand their frustration now that the goalposts have been moved with Brexit. So I think this is a conversation for the Scottish people, and I think whatever they decide is what's right.
Okay, right. We have 15 more minutes to put questions to our panel. 0345 6060 973. It's 8:46.
LBC.
Ten to 9 on LBC. We've just been talking about Prince William's beard or lack of it. Theresa, I know you like to know what we talk about in breaks. Theresa Villiers is here, Nimco Ali, Owen Thompson from the SNP, and Jonathan Liss. Right, very serious question coming up from Jake in Orpington. Hello, Jake.
Thank you, Ian, for taking my call. Evening panel. Today, with the sentencing that was handed out to Eleanor Williams, was it severe enough? Because I don't think it doesn't even come close for me. For what she set in motion. Go on.
I was just going to put it in context, if I can. Eleanor Williams was jailed for 8.5 years for perverting the course of justice after falsely claiming she was raped and trafficked by an Asian grooming gang, sparking public protests in the town of Barnet-in-Furness in Cumbria, which involved Tommy Robinson. She posted photos on social media of horrific injuries, but the court was told that these were self-inflicted. 3 of her victims tried to take their own lives following her false claims. Now, an 8.5 year sentence, I mean, that sounds an awful lot. You wonder whether there's a bit of deterrent value in that on the part of the judge. Hugely serious case. It shows actions have consequences. And you don't often see these sorts of cases. And we're going to be talking about this much more after 9, so I want to get your reaction to this. And I'm also going to ask if you've been the victim of false allegations in the past. Nimco, let's start with you on this. Do you think this was an appropriate sentence?
Do you know what? This is when I'm going to sound like a bleeding lefty liberal, but I'm sure I'm going to get told up on Twitter. No, I think it's quite hefty in the sense that I think we have to put it into context in the fact that what she did was completely wrong, and I think she should have been sentenced. And the fact that she's found guilty is great, but the whole point is that, people that make up these false allegations make a very, very tiny proportion of people. And also the reality is most of the violence and the absurd and things that happen weren't committed by her. So this is a non-violent offender being sentenced to 8 years, where men who have actually raped women are not sentenced to that kind of hefty sentences. And I would rather her get mental health support than actually be sent to prison. And that's the way I look at it. I was just saying beforehand that the first and only conviction that we have on FGM in this country was with a woman as well, and she was sentenced to 11 years. So I do think that there is a bit of sexism with the length of this sentence in terms of perverting the course of justice.
But surely it sends out a signal to anybody who's considering making a false allegation of whatever nature. Don't do it, because these are the consequences.
But no, so the reality is people are more likely to make a false kind of insurance claim than they are to say that they're falsely being raped or attacked or groomed and all these other kind of things. So I don't know who we're sending this message to, as opposed to really having a conversation of really tampering this conversation and saying whether this woman had serious mental health issues, because I wouldn't actually necessarily think anybody that was well would be able to do the things that she did. So I don't necessarily think...
You could say that about any crime, though.
So the whole point is I actually believe in rehabilitation rather than this kind of punitive measures that are meant to scare people off when these kind of accusations are rarely made. So I think a lot of people are jumping on that kind of the bandwagon and are thinking that women are willy-nilly making up issues of rape and these kind of things when very few women actually report the sexual offences that are committed against them. So I'm happy that she's been sentenced and I'm happy that there's justice, but I think that the sentence is a bit hefty. And also I think the fact that we need to be able to understand that this is a rare occurrence and it's not something that happens consistently, and the main violence and the main issues were caused by men who are racist. And so I don't necessarily think that Tommy Robinson would have used anybody else in order to be able to kind of attack communities the way he does. I don't necessarily think that he needed this young woman in order to justify his actions.
The point here, I think, is that racial tensions were heightened in Barrow, clearly exploited by Tommy Robinson and his ilk. That would not have happened had she not made these false allegations.
No, so these false allegations are part of a broader failing of actually the kind of the community cohesion and the police and everything else. And I say this again as somebody that saw white working class girls being dismissed because of the reason when they were evidently being groomed and abused by South Asian men. And our current the current Home Secretary at the time, you're using the term paedophiles within the Asian community, was actually kind of shut down as being offensive to say those things. And I say that as somebody who saw thousands of girls be subjected to FGM because we were too culturally sensitive. So I think it is not necessarily the failures and the racial tensions that were high in these communities weren't caused by this one individual case. I think it was just a long-term problem. So I don't think we should be using this individual as a scapegoat.
Okay. Theresa.
Well, what a shocking case. It's not often I find I'm watching the news and I feel really emotionally kind of affected by what I'm seeing, but I certainly did with that. I mean, God, what an appalling experience for the victims of this crime, the men who are accused. But, I mean, I think the judge makes a fair point about how potentially this makes it tougher for women to come forward in the future.
Does it? Why?
Well, I think
if it's genuine, why would this affect people coming forward? I don't understand.
I think, well, they might be more afraid of not being believed because of what's happened in this case. But I absolutely hope that this case doesn't have that effect. I mean, no doubt the judge will have looked at all the circumstances, the fact that some of these offences took place when the person concerned was very young. But it doesn't surprise me that the judge has taken a fairly severe approach on this case.
I mean, let me just read you out the words from Mohammed Ramzan, who was falsely accused by Williams of rape and trafficking. He said he tried to kill himself 2 weeks after being arrested. He said, "I still bear the scars to this day." He said, "I'm not sure how my family and I are going to recover from this," but he added that they were determined to move forward positively with their lives. And I can't imagine what it would be like to be at the centre of this kind of allegation. And I suspect that one of the reasons the sentence was so high is because Eleanor Williams offered no explanation as to why she made these allegations in the first place. Owen Thompson.
Yeah, I mean, I think I largely agree with the points Nimco made. I think we need to be careful when looking at situations like this to make sure that everyone gets the support that they need, and it can't just be about being seen to throw down the longest jail sentence possible. We actually need to make sure that there's an outcome that's useful, and that probably in this case means help for the person who's had the conviction, certainly help for those who've been accused and support for them. But I think, will it put anyone off coming forward on other situations where there's a genuine allegation or complaint to be made? I would certainly hope not. I think there are wider issues that are more likely to put people off bringing forward concerns or complaints than the fact that somebody has made a false accusation. And I think there's a wider issue that we all need to be tackling about making sure that anyone coming forward with this sort of level of very, very serious accusation gets all the help and support they need to make sure that it can be looked into properly, and perhaps make sure that where there is a genuine case, that we do need to do so much more to make sure that women are believed. And I'd really hope that we can find a way through this, because it does make it a bit more complicated.
Jonathan.
Well, I think the first thing to say about this is that it's incredibly rare for it to happen. And every time it does happen, I think it's incredibly damaging because it sort of feeds into a false narrative, or that maybe it wasn't quite as it appeared, maybe the woman shouldn't be believed. And that is really terrible for combating the culture that we have, where only a tiny, tiny proportion of rape sort of accusations ever lead to conviction. I think it's, sort of 4% or something dreadful like that. And so it is very damaging for that. Clearly, this is a premeditated campaign as well, and so that does have to be punished. But on the other hand, I agree with what Nimco says about sort of mental health and rehabilitation, and the sentence that she received is much less than many sort of rape sort of convictions result in, and so it does seem to be an imbalance. But I think it is very important for the safeguarding of this of rape convictions that we do punish very, very strongly in as far as we can instances where women are sort of fabricating allegations to the extent that this one has.
Right, let's move on to our final fun question from Robbie in Chelmsford. Rishi Sunak has been told off by the police again after letting his dog off its lead in Hyde Park against the rules. When were you last told off? Who by? And what was it for? Nimco.
We were talking about this during the break. I'm more the person that tells people off, actually. So if I saw Rishi in Hyde Park, I would have probably told him off. And I'm actually quite well behaved. I've never even had a detention at school, so I can't remember the last time I was told off.
That's so boring.
I am boring.
I'm sure Jonathan will be able to maybe exceed that.
I don't get told off for anything. I never get caught in. No. I suppose the last time I was told off was probably for jaywalking. One of the best things about Britain is we don't have jaywalking on the statute books, whereas you go in other countries and have this bizarre rule that you're not allowed to cross a road unless a green man tells you, and if it's completely empty. So I have been told off for that. In fact, I got fined by the police in Belarus.
Did you? In Belarus?
Yeah, it was the most terrifying moment of my life, actually. I was literally crossing an empty street, and suddenly I just heard this whistle, and a man came up and sort of demanded my passport and wanted some money, and that was quite an extraordinary sort of moment of terror. But yeah, I also tell people off for I would tell people off if I was less scared about about cycling on the pavement is one thing that I really hate. So I tell people off.
Owen?
I guess, I suppose as Chief Whip, I would periodically be summoned to see the Speaker. It was like getting called into the Headmaster's office if somebody had perhaps not entirely followed the procedures of the House. It was me that was then the one who was summoned to then pass on messages. So I guess that would be probably the last thing.
Theresa?
Well, I kind of get told off every time I post something on social media. I have.
You're not on Twitter.
No, I'm on Facebook and Instagram. I steer clear of Twitter. But you know what it's like? I have some followers who regularly post negative comments
I
on
do
my
know what
pages.
it's like, I can assure you.
So, I could be just posting something. It's my birthday today, and I would be told off by certain people on my Facebook.
By the social media police. Thank you very much indeed to all of you, to Theresa, Nimco, Owen and Jonathan. As I say, coming up in a moment, we are going to talk about this case of Eleanor Williams, the 22-year-old who made false claims of being groomed by an Asian gang. She's been sentenced to 8.5 years in prison today. I want to get your reaction to that sentence. And also, I want to ask you, well, quite a personal question, really, and I'm going to be very interested to see what the response is. Have you ever been falsely accused of something? What happened? What effect did it have on you? Was it resolved in the end? And is it something that still dominates your thoughts, maybe even years on from the actual allegation? 0345 6060 973. That's